Welcome to the Walrus Talks AccessAbility presented by Deloitte. I'm Jennifer Hollett, the Executive Director of the Walrus. It's great to see you all. We are thrilled to be here in person in Toronto and streaming live at thewalrus.ca. A big hello and welcome to the over 600 households across Canada and beyond who have registered for our live stream. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that we're on. We're gathered within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. At the Walrus, we're honored to carry on a tradition of storytelling, working with Indigenous contributors. And we encourage you to reflect on the land that you're on, wherever you're joining us from today, in this room or online at home. A bit more about the Walrus. The Walrus is Canada's conversation. We cover stories across Canada in a variety of formats, for those inside and outside the country. From tariffs to taunts of becoming the 51st state, Canada is the conversation. We are responding to this moment with facts, analysis, and even some humor. You can find us online at thewalrus.ca, in print on newsstands, or by subscribing to The Walrus. You can also listen to our podcasts and stories online or take part in events like this one. This work is independent, empowered by our community of donors, supporters, and partners. Thank you all for being here and to Deloitte for partnering with us on this event. May 31st marks the start of National Accessibility Week, a time to celebrate the leadership and achievements of people with disabilities, while also recognizing the accessibility barriers that continue to exist in Canada. Tonight's speakers will explore accessibility, not just as a policy issue, but as a question of culture, leadership, storytelling, and human rights. They'll examine everything from ableism in workplaces and institutions, to the challenges of implementation and enforcement, to the power of representation and changing the stories we tell about disability in Canada. Tonight's format is a bit different from the typical Walrus Talks events. For this edition, we are making even more room for conversation. You'll be hearing from 5 speakers who each speak for 5 minutes, followed by a panel discussion to dig into the ideas, the experiences, and the challenges that they raise. And there's another exciting element tonight. It's also a live recording of Courage Inc., a podcast produced by the Walrus Lab with Deloitte. On the podcast, host Duncan Sinclair explores the ideas, leadership, and conversations shaping the future of industries, and in turn, the courage of our nation. We're thrilled to have Duncan moderating this discussion. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Lorin MacDonald, a human rights and disability lawyer with more than 30 years of practice spanning accessibility advocacy, litigation, policy, and legal education. Born with profound hearing loss, she is a member of the Order of Canada and the Order of Ontario, and is widely recognized for her work advancing inclusion for people with disabilities. Stephanie Cadieux, Canada's first Chief Accessibility Officer. A former member of BC's legislature and cabinet, Stephanie was the first woman with a visible disability to hold those roles and is known for bringing lived experience, collaboration, and practical leadership to accessibility policy and systemic change. Chris Dodd, an award-winning deaf actor, playwright, and accessibility advocate based in Edmonton. He is the founder and artistic director of Sound Off, Canada's festival devoted to deaf performance. Chris will be presenting his talk in ASL tonight with voicing interpretation. Neil Belanger, the Chief Executive Officer of Indigenous Disability Canada and the BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. For more than 30 years, his work has focused on advancing the rights of Indigenous peoples with disabilities and addressing barriers in healthcare, accessibility, and social services. And Prasanna Ranganathan, a producer, human rights lawyer, and diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging consultant with global experience across law, technology, entertainment, and public policy. And I have to share backstage, we just all agreed he's the best dressed here in the room. Just facts. Formerly head of diversity and belonging at Shopify and a disability rights advisor at the United Nations Development Program. Prasanna's work focuses on disability justice, representation, accessibility, and cultural change. Thank you all for joining us. And Lorin, thank you for your vision, and over to you to get us started.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lorin MacDonald, and thank you, Jen, and thank you, the Walrus and Deloitte Canada, for this evening in the lead up to National Accessibility Week. It matters who we ensure is in the room for these conversations. The speakers on this stage tonight bring many intersecting identities and lived experiences. What brings us together is the conviction that rooms like this must be designed with everyone in mind. Tonight, this room was. That is rarer than it should be. As Jennifer mentioned, I was born with profound hearing loss. I have spent more than 30 years in human rights, law, and disability advocacy in this country. And after all these years, this much has not changed. In every room I have entered, I have had to negotiate for the right to participate. Canada enshrines equality in its charter and celebrates it in its speeches. And yet, when I say I need captioning to participate, the response is almost always surprise, as though it had never occurred to anyone that a person who cannot hear might enter the room. That default reveals how theoretical equality still remains for far too many. A human captioner is transcribing on the screen the words right now so that everyone can fully participate in this conversation. And yet, accessibility is still treated as optional. For years, I have been excluded from events that did not provide captioning, even when I asked. And at some point, we must acknowledge that when the same omission recurs year after year, it is no longer an oversight. It is a decision. This is ableism, the structural kind. It rests on the assumption that every person can hear, see, and move through spaces without obstacles. Inequality that is invisible to the majority is inequality they will never feel compelled to address. Equality is not an accommodation. It is an obligation. In 2017, I represented a young woman who was barred from using a restaurant washroom because of her disability. 3 years later, the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario confirmed that this action violated the Human Rights Code. A washroom, core to human dignity. These are the battles we are still fighting. As diversity, equity, and inclusion faces retreat across North America, disability is once again the first thing abandoned and the last restored. 1 in 4 Canadians lives with a disability. More than 8 million people. They are your family and friends, neighbors and coworkers, and they are your future self, because disability is the only marginalized identity anyone can acquire without warning. Yet, it remains the one identity our institutions feel entirely comfortable disregarding. Ableism continues as the last acceptable prejudice because it is the last to be named. It lives in the structures and assumptions of everyday life. Name it. Once named, it cannot be ignored. Every one of us then must decide what we intend to do about it. I am here to ask for what no Canadian should have to ask for: the ability to enter a room and participate with dignity. It is a right. And until we honor it as one, the word inclusion describes only the distance between what we promise and what we deliver. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Wow, Lorin. Hi, I'm Stephanie Cadieux, and thank you for having me join you tonight. Thank you to Deloitte for participating as a host for the evening and this important conversation. Accessibility is a big topic, and one that is still widely misunderstood. Fostering a deeper understanding of accessibility and what it means and why it matters is one of the main goals of the Accessible Canada Act. And if we don't get that right, then nothing else will matter. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight to discuss it with all of you. But I'll start off with some background. Advocacy for disability rights has a long history in Canada. And we reached a major milestone in 2019 with the passage of the Accessible Canada Act unanimously in Parliament. The Act was developed using a social model of disability. That defines disability as something that exists only in interaction with a barrier that hinders someone's full and equal participation in society. In other words, disabilities are not the problem. The barriers are. This is in contrast to the outdated medical model, which most people are familiar with. One that focuses on the individual and treats those disabilities as deficits. And it forces those individuals to fight for their access as individuals when the barriers they're fighting against are largely systemic. The Act places the onus on the system now to remove the barriers. And it has a goal of doing that by 2040. The Act applies to the federal government, federal crown corporations, and the federally regulated industries like telecoms, banks, and airlines. These organizations are required now by law to, in consultation with people with disabilities, to identify the barriers in their organizations and to set forth a plan to remove them. This requires now more than 6,000 organizations to proactively take ownership of the barriers. The Act created a couple of organizations or positions. It created Accessibility Standards Canada, whose role is to create the standards and recommend what needs to go into regulation. It created the role of the Accessibility Commissioner, who will monitor and enforce compliance with the Act and its regulations. And it put in place the Office of the Chief Accessibility Officer, the role that I am now holding, to remind government and all of the entities of the work they have to do, to help them understand what their obligations are, to help them solve problems, and largely to act as chief influencer on accessibility, to try and make sure that this conversation is in every conversation, at the beginning and not at the end when it's too late to act. I don't have my iPad. So I've been in this role now for just over 4 years, and I'm beginning my second term. And there is progress to celebrate. But a lot of work remains because policy and legislation haven't translated yet into meaningful change. Accessible housing remains an urgent issue. Accessible transportation is hit or miss. And there's nowhere in Canada where we can be sure we can get an accessible taxi in time to start the event. Hotels, restaurants, and destinations advertise accessibility without understanding what it is they mean by that. I know the other panelists here will have a lot to say about the lived experiences and the gaps that exist, so I'll conclude by saying this. We're living through a period of rapid change, and we're confronting a lot of challenges, and we're embarking on nation-building projects at a speed we haven't in the past. This is the time to get accessibility right, if not every time before. The reality is that not embedding accessibility from the start means that we've gotten it wrong. It means that we haven't considered everyone. And if Canada's going to remain competitive in a global marketplace, we have to get this right. Thanks for having me.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Dodd. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. I'm not going to focus so much on policy. I'm actually going to share and focus a little bit on my experience as a deaf person, as a deaf artist. And I'll start with a question. What does accessibility feel like in practice? Before I talk about that, I'm going to go back a little bit and share a bit of my personal background with you. I was raised in Edmonton. I was always passionate about theater at a young age, and I was always looking for opportunities to participate. And it was upon the suggestion of a high school teacher that I go to the drama program at the university. And it was 5 years for me to complete my degree in drama, and I was the first deaf person to graduate from that particular program. But we're going back to 1998, where there were not the opportunities there are now for deaf actors. It was more of a focus working with interpreters. It was a struggle. And there wasn't the support there that we had. So change happened very, very slowly, along with DEI, as that's been mentioned. I was the founder of a festival called Sound Off, and that was in the year 2017. That festival has been running now for 10 years. I'm very, very thankful for it. That festival itself gave me the opportunity and also to provide the opportunity to the community that I didn't have before. Now I want to bring us to present day, 2026. I don't feel like we're where we should be in terms of accessibility. There's a lot of barriers that come up for deaf and disabled artists across Canada, and it's a very common lived experience. For example, we're talking about stage. There's 1.6 deaf and hard of hearing, 1.6 million deaf and hard of hearing people right now in Canada. And it would be nice if there was rules specifically for deaf people. For example, the show and the story, you've heard of Death of a Salesman, for example. And when we talk about the audition process, it's not accessible either. As a member of ACTRA, there is issues with equity for members. And my confidence, was challenged as well. There were many other challenges. We miss out on, in terms of different opportunities because of access, or we often have to have interpreters involved in the programs we take as well, which then creates less opportunities for us and a lack of equity. And representation, in terms of having people in positions of power, I would add as well, is a barrier. Having people who are deaf or disabled on boards of directors. People who can be in positions of power to make those influential changes. And there's two core reasons. One is treating accessibility as a check mark. It's sort of, if I was to use that phrase, one and done. Oh, we'll do this, we'll put this in place quickly, we'll take care of that problem right now, but that's not something long-standing. And the second is being reactive instead of proactive as well. What happens is there's not a plan for accessibility in the budget, or people didn't think about that. And the reason being, there's a lot of fear. Some of the fear can be related to change, fear of the unknown, fear of doing the wrong thing, and fear of not knowing where to get started. I think what can be done is hiring a deaf consultant, hiring various consultants, hiring an accessibility consultant. People in those professional roles can consult with you and help you develop a budget and plan and build in that accessibility. And if we plan and we're prepared and we're ready and we do that from the beginning, that's where we can make that change. Budgets reflect values as well. And in the end, those values should include human rights. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Simgiget Sigadam Hanap Kobawulsik. Before I begin, I'd just like to also recognize the territories we're meeting on today and thank the Walrus and Deloitte and Lorin for bringing us together again, and as well as Kaylin, who's on the floor there, who's done a lot of background work. As noted, my name is Neil Belanger, and I'm a member of the Lac-Salle clan of the Gitxsan Nation, and I work for Indigenous Disability Canada and the BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. So I'm going to veer off topic here for a second. I think about 7 years ago, I did a Walrus Talk in Vancouver, and at that time, my daughter, I think, was in grade 3. And I asked the audience to participate with her because when you travel a lot, you don't get to see your kids. She's changed since that time. She used to call me dad. Now she calls me girl and bra. I don't know what any of that stuff means. So I say 6'7" to her, and she says, "Oh, Dad, what are you doing?" I don't know what 6'7" means, but anyways, so she's under the impression that somehow because I often have meetings with important people, such as the stage here, that somehow I have some influence, and I have none. But I need you to do me a favor here today. She's a big Billie Eilish fan, and she said to me, she keeps telling me, she goes, "Dad, can't you get her to call me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, yeah, I can do that." So what I need the audience here to do today in a loud voice is I'm going to film this, and then I'm going to put it on social media, and I just need you to say, "Hey, Billie Eilish, call Katie." That's all I need, okay? Say it, and say it in a loud voice when I give you the nod, and then we'll see if anything happens, and it'll be a good Walrus story as well. So when I give you the point, "Hey, Billie Eilish, call Katie." Hey, Billie Eilish, call Katie. Give her a call, Billie. Thank you for that. So I'm very pleased to be here tonight and to be able to join you in person and to have so many people online as well. As been noted, we know that NAW Week is coming up, May 31st to June 6th. A great time to celebrate the accomplishments of many organizations and persons with disabilities and the contributions that they bring to all of us across Canada. The theme for 2026 is Building a Strong, Accessible Canada. Additionally, in line with that, the spring economic statement that was tabled by the government is called Canada Strong for All. As such, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about our organization and some of the things that we do to try to make Canada strong, try to reduce some of the barriers that persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples with disabilities face today. So our organization is internationally recognized and award-winning National Indigenous Disability Organization. We have offices in Victoria, British Columbia, and Ottawa as well. And one of our organizations that we share the office space with us is tonight is Maureen Hahn from the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work. We're happy to see her here today. Our organization holds special consultative status with the United Nations Council on Economic and Social Development, and was the lead secretariat organization working with over 55 other national disability organizations on Canada's second and third review, which was completed in March of last year. So through our organization, we work with thousands of individuals, families, and organizations annually, and we provide a variety of programs and services across Canada. Some of these include Indigenous Disability Case Management, where we assist to obtain the necessary disability health and social-related support. And this ranges from housing to adaptive technologies to education and transportation. We have a fairly new program called the National Indigenous Navigation Services, where we assist Indigenous individuals and families to access the benefits that they are entitled to. Those are provincial benefits, federal benefits, territorial benefits, ranging from PWD to Jordan's Principle. We also have a Jordan's Principle program where we work with eligible First Nations children and their family to ensure that they receive the services that they're entitled to without delay or denial due to jurisdictional disputes. In BC, we also adjudicate persons with disability applications within the majority of First Nations. There's about 205 First Nations in BC. We adjudicate for about 197. We do national research projects and currently have 2 underway looking at accessible housing and also on Indigenous perspectives of disability. And we work with other partners on various other external projects from research as well. We work with Justice Canada to ensure that UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Persons, is incorporated to all the work that they do and the documents and strategic planning that go forward. And in 2015, we created Indigenous Disability Awareness Month because Indigenous disability is not a priority within any government across Canada. So to raise the profile, we created it in 2016. November is now recognized across Canada as Indigenous Disability Awareness Month, and 2026 marks the 12th anniversary. And this year as well, we're holding our biannual gathering, which brings people from across Canada to collaborate and learn on Indigenous disability issues. We also sit on approximately 30 advisory boards to governments and community organizations to ensure that the priorities and barriers of Indigenous peoples with disabilities are known and to assist in eliminating the barriers within current systems. All the work that we do, all the work that our team does is to assist people we serve to have a better life. A life where their needs and their priorities and barriers are addressed, and where they're better enabled to be active and inclusive members of their communities in the ways that they desire. And I think as an Indigenous disability service provider, I think the services that we do are pretty good. I think that our staff do really good work. As a country, though, when we think about the direction we're going, and we think about the Accessible Canada Act, for example, and with the promise or the hope to be barrier-free by 2040, and a Canada Strong for All, as the Spring Economic Statement noted, I think that for persons with disability, we are going to be largely continue to be wanting. While within the current or the spring economic, the spring budget, there was some movement with the disability tax credit where they added a few more categories and a few more people that could do it. It largely bypassed the needs of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples with disability, which represent over 27% of our population. Today, across Canada as well, we see an exponential growth in anti-Indigenous racism and disability discrimination, largely due to our relations with our neighbors to the south, but also other things are happening, like in BC with the Calvin case and that type of thing, where misinformation becomes reality, and reality turns into, discrimination and isolation. Costs and barriers continue to increase for the necessities of daily living, including food, shelter, transportation, access to necessary health and disability services. Seeing no meaningful increases to federal, provincial, and territorial disability benefits and services to address this reality for a long time. And surprisingly, up to $2.66 a day for those eligible for the Canada Disability Benefit has not pulled persons out of poverty. And in some cases, provinces are even clawing that back. First Nations are exempted from the Accessible Canada Act and are going to be exempted until 2033. The governments of Canada, despite receiving recommendations 14 months ago in relation to the CRPD, have yet to address any of those recommendations publicly and has no plans to do so anytime in the future. There are a plethora of other barriers and inadequacies that continue to leave many peoples and families in frustration, isolation, and desperation, with too many considering medical assistance in line track 2 as an escape from this suffering. Suffering that could be alleviated if adequate, timely, and relevant supports were in place. Governments will often note that to address these system deficits would be too costly, or that change takes time, or we would hope to do better tomorrow. But tomorrow never seems to come. And persons with disabilities can continue to be asked to do more with less and to be grateful with what they have. Moving forward, we need allies in government. We lost a lot during the last federal election. We lost a lot provincially as well. We need the disability community to come together. We need to show that Canada and beyond, that persons with disabilities are key and indispensable players that have already made and continue to make Canada strong. And that with new and adequate supports and services, doors that have never been opened would be unlocked, and opening new realms of possibility. And truly, that would make us a strong nation. Amia, thank you. Have a good evening.
Hello, everyone. My name is Prasanna, and I'm thrilled to be here. We live in a world where stories are all around us. Rich, multifaceted stories. However, when it comes to disabled people, we are relegated to limited stories, rooted in stereotypes that are told to us and about us. I know this firsthand, facing the same stories over and over and over again. You are a problem, a thorn in our side, a blight we are forced to tolerate. The story of disrespect and discrimination. While we are in awe of you, your disability means that you won't be able to keep up. The story of devastating disregard cloaked in dismissive inspiration. There is no place for you here. We don't understand you, and we don't want to. The story of consistent diminishment and denial. As long as we do not change the stories we tell, and the stories being told about us as disabled people, it doesn't matter what the Accessible Canada Act or AODA says. Accessibility policy promises in legislation and in advocacy won't mean a thing. Now, there are 4 principal barriers to accessibility, but we often focus only on the first 3. Physical barriers, information and communication barriers, and systemic barriers. But very little attention is paid to the 4th barrier, attitudinal barriers, or ableism. And the reality is that if we do not address ableism and create a world where disabled people are acknowledged in the fullness of who we are, accessibility will continue to be out of reach. We need to leverage the power of storytelling to unlock the protections, power, and promise of accessibility legislation. But how exactly do we do that? First, we need to understand. We need to really, really, really understand disability. We need to highlight that disability does not mean brokenness. Our disabilities arise in our interaction with the world around us. My blindness arises because I live in a world that is designed for people who see. There is nothing wrong with me. There is no flaw or defect in me that needs to be fixed. Furthermore, disability is not a niche issue. 27% of the adult population in Canada and the United States is disabled, and 75% of all people will experience disability at some point in their lives. We are here. Don't ignore us. Disability is not a monolithic experience. There's immense diversity in the disability community, and we need to prioritize intersectionality, highlighting the different experiences of disabled people across race, indigeneity, gender, and sexual orientation. I cannot tell you the number of times I have felt excluded as a racialized, queer, disabled person in disability advocacy work or storytelling because of the failure to consider intersectionality, which then replicates the very exclusion that the laws and policies are seeking to address in the first place. To pursue a truly intersectional approach to disability, we must shatter core myths. For instance, having a disability does not denote a lack of intelligence. Accommodations are not always costly. In fact, 50% of all accommodations cost absolutely nothing. Second, accessibility is a design philosophy. It is not a compliance checklist. It's the entry point to disability inclusion, not the end goal. Accessibility is about unlocking the door so disabled people can be in the room and lead, contribute, and drive change. We need to highlight that disability inclusion fuels economic development. According to the TD Economics report, moderately narrowing the labor market gap for disabled people could bring a $50 billion GDP boost, add nearly 450,000 new jobs, and have positive effects on consumer spending. Third, we need to support, empower, and grow our creative sectors. We need to fund storytelling from disabled creatives across film and TV, across music and live theater. In the United States, only 2.1% of all speaking characters in the top 100 grossing films are disabled, and we have yet to fully collect and share comparable data in Canada. And research shows us that most stories featuring disabled characters solely focus on the barriers that these characters face. We need to move beyond the common tropes when telling disabled stories. We are not the barriers we face. We are not here to inspire. We are not here to educate through sharing stories of struggle. My pain alone should not propel your engagement or be the catalyst for progress. Policy promises are unlocked only when our stories are shared in all of their complex glory. And we need to create opportunities for disabled creatives to tell our own stories, which is why I'm so proud to be a part of the Disability Screen Office, which is dedicated to removing accessibility barriers and creating opportunities for disabled creatives through learning programming, production accessibility roles, industry hubs, and best practices guides for accessible productions. Finally, we need to pursue a cohesive approach to this work. We must ensure that storytelling, legislation, policy, creativity, corporate commitments are working together, no longer siloed, but woven into a tapestry of meaningful change. We need to harness creativity to highlight the importance of accessibility in a way that prompts reflection and inspires action from employers, leaders, and organizations across all sectors. At the end of the day, it's beyond time for the world to tell a new story, to demand that institutions and non-disabled people make change. So what stories can they tell? We are getting in your way, and we can no longer do so. The story of acknowledgement and reckoning. Progress must happen through commitments, resourcing, and action. The story of boundless possibility and shared responsibility. Disability is a treasured part of the human experience. The story of meaningful inclusion and belonging. Stories have the power to not just reflect the world in which we live, but imagine the world we seek to build. So as disabled and non-disabled people alike, what stories are we currently telling? And what stories are we going to tell? The world is waiting. Because when, and I say when, we dream of an accessible, inclusive future, once upon a time starts now. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Lorin MacDonald, Stephanie Cadieux, Chris Dodd, Neil Belanger, and Prasanna Ranganathan. A round of applause. And now we're excited to continue the conversation with tonight's panel. Our moderator is Duncan Sinclair, Chair of Deloitte Canada and Chile, and a member of the Deloitte Global Board. For more than 35 years, Duncan has advised organizations and governments around the world across a wide range of sectors. Duncan was recently awarded the King Charles III Coronation Medal and the Honorable Wim Kotcher Award from the Canadian Foundation for Physically Disabled Persons for his philanthropic efforts. A welcome and round of applause for Duncan Sinclair.
Thank you. So you need to realize that when we do Courage Incorporated, and we've done that now for 5 seasons, I have the luxury of talking to one person at a time. I don't have an audience around me. Sometimes we can do a retake. So trust me, this is going to be an exciting opportunity for all of us to see how well a live conversation can broaden itself out and feel the energy from all of you as we do that. This has been a wonderfully powerful beginning to an incredibly important conversation about our country. This is not a political statement, but I do want to start by reminding all of us about our Prime Minister's speech in Davos, where he talked about the world order has changed. And as the world order changes, our country has to change. We tell stories, Prasanna, you say, what are the stories we tell? We tell stories of our dependence on the United States has to change. What's the economic effect of that? But here's a story that we don't tell, and yet we should. We can find $50 billion a year of economic opportunity and impact by uniting to include all Canadians to participate in their nation to the best of their potential. What an unbelievable opportunity. What an appalling reality. And so this, for me, is something that I'd like to start with all of you reacting to, because we do have legislation. We do have matters entrenched in our Constitution. We have mission statements. We have organizations that publicly come out and make commitments, and yet millions of people, 1.6 million Canadians, day in and day out, live with barriers visible and invisible in the way they try to conduct their lives. And I'd like to open this by each of you just saying, so what does that say about Canada today, and what's the hope you have for Canada tomorrow? Let me start here.
Of course, I get to go first. What does that mean? It means that we haven't confronted our unconscious biases. We are saying we believe in inclusion. We're not living it. We are making active choices not to allow people with disabilities to fully contribute. And we think it's okay. We think it's charitable. We can do it when there's time, when there's money, and when it's convenient.
Neil, what do you think?
Thanks, Duncan. I agree with Stephanie. I think that, in Canada today, and this isn't something new. It didn't happen because of, the election down in the States. The barriers that and exclusion that persons with disabilities face has been around for all the history of Canada. And we try to be more progressive. In Steffi's speech as well, there are some good things that are happening, but we've got a long way to go. And it's not just the governments, it's the municipalities, everything else, and things that non-disabled persons take for granted, like snow removal, those type of things that if it snows 3 days in Toronto here and you're not shoveling the sidewalk and somebody lives in an apartment that has mobility issues, they're isolated for 3 days. We don't plan those things. Disability isn't going anywhere. Governments don't seem to realize that, because those 30 advisory organizations or committees that I sit on, we keep saying the same thing. We bring solutions that the people that we serve tell us, but government comes down to a budget line, or it comes down to we can't do it today, like again what Stephanie said, and we'll do it tomorrow. But again, tomorrow never comes. So, but we have to be positive, and I am positive because there has been good change, but we've got such a long way to go. And it takes the disability community to come together. It takes the non-disabled population of Canada to come together and say this is a priority. It takes cities, it takes mayors, it takes different allies that we haven't used before to step up and say, this is not acceptable. And I think until we can do that, we'll be talking 30 years from now saying, well, hopefully we'll get there someday.
Chris, I should say that I grew up in Edmonton, so it's wonderful to have a fellow Edmontonians here on the stage. So I don't always have the pleasure of that, so thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for that. My hometown, definitely. It's a great place. So your question, when I was looking into this panel and we talk about the different accessibility acts and policies, as was touched on, the different levels of government, I feel like the most common comment that's focused on accessibility, it talks about accessibility but not the people. For deaf people and disabled people, it's almost like we're not there. We're being talked about. And abilities and disabilities are talked about, but the individuals aren't actually there. I believe in the power of conversation. I believe in asking people what they believe in. And through that, we can make better policies and laws and legislation. I think we need to do less talking about it and more action, like having a balance of it. We need to talk about things, yes, we need to have conversation, but we need to put the focus back on people. That's what I feel instinctively. And now over to you.
Thank you. I think I would build on what Stephanie and Chris both shared in their responses and in their presentations. The idea is that legislation looks at the social model of disability, this notion of barriers, creating frameworks that keep people with disabilities out of opportunities. But in reality, the operationalization of those policies is still rooted in the medical model. People with disabilities are asked to advocate for what we need. We're constantly asked to bring up the issues that need to be addressed structurally and systemically. So all of the protections on paper or in legislation talk about the shared commitment and responsibility to take meaningful action to build and embed accessibility into all that we do. But even like a quick point is that when individuals seek accommodations in the workplace, workplaces aren't using those accommodation requests to consider how they should be redesigning workplaces to make them more accessible. The burden is consistently placed on people with disabilities to advocate for what we need to fit within systems that were designed to exclude us and create our disabilities because of our existence in the built and designed environment. So until there's that nexus, that connection, which takes the responsibility off of our shoulders, places it on the collective shoulders, and then ensures that there's budget and policy will to make that a collective responsibility, I feel like we're not going to move forward in a way that'll have an impact.
So in my view, Canada is still more comfortable talking about accessibility than embedding it in everyday life. And we've heard that we've made important legislative and policy advances, but disabled people are still encountering barriers, and that tells us something important, that rights on paper are not the same as having rights in practice. And, you know, disabled people, as I mentioned, are still expected to request, explain, negotiate, and sometimes fight for access. So the disconnect reveals a deeper cultural issue in that we still tend to see accessibility as a specialized issue affecting a minority of people, rather than as a part of building a society that allows everyone to participate with dignity. So until accessibility becomes something we design for proactively rather than reactively, that gap between commitment and lived experience will remain. And even just today, I was out in my community in Toronto, and I saw how often universal design principles benefit everyone. I was on my way to Shoppers Drug Mart. A mom carrying a baby, pushing a stroller, used the automatic door opener to get in. There are ramps everywhere that delivery people use, people who are temporarily disabled, and we need to start thinking in that mindset. But I have also believed for years, and I've seen it in practice, that the political will is an important factor. And until disability becomes personal to those with power, the dial won't move. I recall very clearly the late Jim Flaherty, when he was a member of Parliament, who brought in the Registered Disability Savings Plan. Why? Because it was personal to him. And we need to use our collective voice to say we are not a minority. We are 27% of Canadians, 8 million. And that number is growing with the aging of our population. Some of us in the room are likely seeing parents who are aging, who live with disabilities. And we are not an outlier. We are a factor of life from cradle to grave. We will acquire disabilities if we're fortunate enough to live that long. And so these are the hard conversations, but I think time is up and we need to move things because nothing's changing. The conversation about workplace accessibility, empowering people with disabilities, getting them hired. How long have we heard of this study's been put out? This study says this. We need to be doing that. And it's still not happening. So I think that's the challenge we have before us. And I think it's great that the Walrus curated this panel with Deloitte support so that people can hear from diverse voices that we are not, as my friend here said, a monolith. You're not disabled or not disabled. There's a range, a continuum. So that's my thoughts on that.
So Lorin, let me continue that point with you for a moment, because if I were to, as someone who was born and raised and lived in Canada for the 59 years I've been alive, Canadians are really nice. All over the world, everyone says we're such lovely, nice people. We're incredibly polite, and we're also unbelievably prejudiced. And the worst part is, we don't even think about it. It's not like we actively go out and proclaim it. We just passively ignore it. We don't think about it. To your point, until it became personal to an individual, it isn't that someone actively woke up in the morning and said, I want to make sure that there's no captioning. They don't think about why captioning is important. And I have to say that when you told your story at the very beginning of this about a young woman in 2017 denied access to a washroom, it's a horrible story. I have to also say, as just a Canadian, and it's appalling that it wasn't until 2020 that the process you launched as an attorney for her actually came to a resolution to agree that, yes, it was the wrong thing to do. So even when we try to get it right, it takes us a long time to figure out how to get there. And that doesn't disrespect the incredibly hard work of individuals within the system trying to make positive change. It's the inertia of everybody around them trying to get there. And this is why, through the Walrus, this whole notion of a conversation about having courage is so important. Because it isn't the courage to say, oh, we should fix this thing today. It's the courage to look at ourselves as a society and say, how do we actually unite to make people feel included to the best of who they can be, and what are the amazing stories that we can unlock? So Lorin, as you have spent so many years advocating and fighting for change, the next big positive change you would see would be what?
That I'd be out of a job. That I would no longer have to litigate human rights cases. In fact, I have a case I'm working on now, again, about washroom access. After my last case happened in 2016, 10 years ago, it took 4 years from the date of the incident for the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario to say this is wrong. But here I am again, older and grayer, hopefully a lot wiser, fighting again for a basic human dignity. Because think, if you do not have access to a washroom outside of your home and you're in a public space, what are your options? Exactly. And so I get very frustrated when I'm having to litigate over and over, when I'm having to say I want to attend an event, but there's no captioning. We've never used it. We don't know how it works. It's too expensive. Nobody's asked for it. Ad nauseum. And once again, I do it because I feel I have the skills to do it. But not everybody does. Not everybody is willing to engage in that emotional labor of putting right to wrong. And it's frankly exhausting. But, you know, the thing I try and tell people, and I teach law students, I teach social workers about the law and disability rights, because before they arrive in class, they've never even thought of it, never even had it in any class. It was just something that happened to other people that needs to be fixed. And so I try to educate them so when they go out into practice, letting them know that human rights law does not require perfection. But it does require that organizations think ahead, anticipate barriers, and respond seriously when those barriers are identified. But more importantly, make sure it doesn't happen again. But it does. And so I believe, sadly, that a lot of times exclusion is no longer accidental. If you don't intentionally include, you unintentionally exclude. And another thing in human rights law is that intention doesn't matter. I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't what we were trying to do. We didn't mean to cause any harm. That doesn't matter. What matters is how it landed on the person whose rights were infringed. But the impact of that action is still exclusion. So when accessibility is treated as optional, people are denied, Canadians are denied participation in public life. We all pay taxes, but we're not getting access to the same services. And that's not simply an inconvenience, it is an inequality. And so I think all we can do, like you said at the start, is continue to tell our stories, put a face on it, make it personal, connect with people on that emotional level so that they think, they take a beat when they're planning their next event, when they're hosting a gala, when they have a meeting, when they're doing anything where they invite people in. Who's being invited in? Are there people around the table that offer a true representation of what we as Canadians are? Are we building a Canada for all, as you said? Or are we building a Canada for the privileged only? And I would hope that that is not the case, but it's very challenging some days, and you have to have the hope and the courage to continue speaking out, because I'm not here to make friends. I am here to make change. Doesn't always make me popular, but I don't care. A wrong is a wrong. I'm going to name it. Clean up your act.
So Chris, let me turn to you, because you know, in thinking about some of the things I've seen and you write about and talk about, you've talked about fundamentally how people can be afraid. They can be afraid of change, they can be afraid of getting it wrong, they can be afraid of cost. In your experience, as someone who thinks about creatively telling stories and bringing people together, how do we inspire people to move beyond their fear and actually start working for a better good to include all?
Thank you, Duncan. That's a great question. That fear, unfortunately, it does happen. Often people worry about, but if I do this, I'm going to do the wrong thing. And that causes inaction, in fact. And then that inaction, in turn, it's like an inertia. It causes more problems from there, really. Like I said earlier, that fear, it's better to do something than sit in that worry. You could hire a consultant. You can hire the right people who know what to do to help you in that. I always say, if you want to know what a person needs, ask the person. Ask that person with a disability, or ask a person who is deaf. In terms of those, we know the barriers better than anybody else. We understand that the most. So if that fear comes in and an organization feels like really hesitant and they don't know what to do, I would say have that conversation. It's very, very important to have that conversation. But if it doesn't happen because of fear, unfortunately, that is a human problem, but it's also, there's cultural experiences and opportunities for participation that are lost then. That chance, it's people with disabilities and people who are deaf who lose out on that chance. You become what I would say is a second-class citizen, really. If we're talking about theater, for example, on like an access rider, if you will. So if somebody's going to work with theater and they want to know X, Y, and Z about, okay, what is involved in an accessible performance, you know, okay, we're going to have interpretation, we're going to have proper breaks for everybody. And if that's documented ahead of time, and then we could say, okay, here we go. We have a living, working document that supports inclusion. We can work with that. We can use that. There's a lot of ways we can work around that fear. And there's a lot of ways to get started. And I would say it begins with conversation, and those conversations then in turn lead to action. Period. End of. Thank you.
So Neil, when we think about Indigenous people with disabilities and Indigenous communities, you acknowledge that there were jurisdictional differences between other Canadians and those who are in Indigenous communities. There's also issues of colonialism and poverty or geography, which can also play a part of it. And so in having a conversation about accessibility and looking to include everyone, what are some of the things that people just fail to understand about the dynamics of people with disability in Indigenous community?
Thanks, Duncan. So as I noted, the Accessible Canada Act is First Nations are exempted until 2033. There's probably about 635 First Nations in Canada. Probably 75% need major infrastructure change just for the physical environment, just to make them accessible. The community where my chief lives, Sikanak, no paved roads. They may have corrected it now, but the band office had no ramps to go in there. Social housing is inaccessible for persons with disabilities. The dynamics that people don't know about, First Nations communities and what happens there, many things were largely ignored for decades and decades and decades. We're at a point now, the AFN put out a document requesting, I think it was $300 billion to fix the infrastructure within First Nations. I think they had like $6 billion earmarked for accessibility, which I think is significantly low as well. The barriers that Indigenous peoples within First Nations communities faces, everybody else, it's exclusion if it's not accessible. There's limited access to employment. Because of the anti-Indigenous racism across Canada that has been here for a while, people are reluctant to leave their communities to look for other opportunities because they don't feel welcome. So we get stuck in this same situation there. Funding is inappropriate, supports within community is often unavailable. So it's a difficult situation, and again, the anti-Indigenous racism, permeates through all systems as well. In healthcare, in BC, we have the In Plain Sight report. A young man named Colton Boucher or Keegan Combs, sorry, for an example, young man with his whole life ahead of him with a developmental disability, Indigenous, went into a hospital. He had ingested some poison. They treated him as, he was drunk and left him, and he died, a young man. We go back and we have these celebrations of life for like the Joyce Eschewans of the world or Brian Sinclair. We don't need celebrations of life. We need to start addressing things. Anti-Indigenous racism is a big thing for sure. Accessibility is the other thing in systems and in communities and organizations. And I don't know what the answer is because we've been trying to work on this for a long time. Article 8 in the UN is awareness raising. And typically when it comes to disability, Indigenous disability, we don't hear a lot about it in Canada until something really bad happens. And then we talk about the injustices of what's happening to persons with disabilities. These things can be predicted, these things can be addressed, but it takes that type of thing. We need to work with organizations and governments need to make sure that they're working with, procurement that is disability friendly, that we're giving contracts to organizations that support persons with disabilities. If they're private businesses that, and they're looking for government support in any aspect, that they show how they are supporting persons with disabilities, be employees in that organization. Indigenous and not. We don't do enough of that kind of stuff. Even like on one of the advisory committees that I formerly sat on with, which was a Crown Corporation, I said, tell me, how do you recruit persons with disabilities to be part of this? And even though they had a great, plan, very progressive, accessibility, and they gave a lot of supports, they only gave supports to their employees who became disabled internally, right? They didn't actively solicit people with disabilities to be applying for jobs, and they had to set up their whole organization that way. And these are the things that we have to change. And I wish I had the answers because probably a lot of you in the room have been struggling with that as well and trying to put things forward. There's a reluctance to make significant change, and whatever that is. I think everybody knows that change needs to be made. I don't think you'll find any lawmaker or politician that would, rise in their particular house or parliament or legislation and say things are really great for persons with disabilities, and that's an indicator of how bad it is. But yet we still have to talk every year about, well, maybe next year, and we don't have the money now. And as long as we keep an attitude like that and we're not really prioritizing disability in everything that we do, because realistically, if we put disability accessibility, like Lorin said, it doesn't just benefit persons with disabilities, it benefits elders, it benefits new families, it benefits everybody. It's common sense, but apparently we lack it because it's been common sense for years. So if anybody has any really good suggestions in the audience, come see us, come see any of us, and because we struggle, and while I hope for a better day, it's going to be years to come. So I have no answer.
That was a great answer, Neil, so thank you very much for that. Stephanie, again, I want to come back and acknowledge the number of people who work within the public service to try to make Canada better for all Canadians, including people with disabilities. And you talked about how the legislation that you're a part of and the focus that you have is on the federal government, crown corporations, and federally regulated institutions. But most Canadians don't work in that. They work in the private sector, in small, medium, and provincially regulated businesses. Based on all that you've seen and all that you've experienced so far, if you could say, I would like the ability to require every institution in Canada that employs people to have to, what would that be?
Assign accountability and transparency, and who's responsible for getting it done.
And say more to us about that.
We're pretty good, I'd say, as a country. Different levels of government, there are good public servants, there are good politicians, good intentions, lots of places, most places. We don't intentionally set out to exclude. I don't believe we do that. But we're very good at saying what we're going to do. We're not very good at actually getting it done, because there are lots of priorities. There are lots of things we need to do, and things change quickly, and I know this. I was there, I was at the cabinet table. you can't keep track of everything. And there's going to be another emergency and another crisis, and something is going to be the flavor of the day. Some very important things conflict, and decisions have to be made. But the problem is, what we do is we just push off the thing we're working on and we focus on the new crisis or the new priority. And nobody ever goes back and says, oh, but that thing we said we were going to do, who was responsible? Did it get done? Or where is it at? Because, in fairness, not everything can be accomplished tomorrow. We can't just flick a switch and fix all the wrongs. But we can say, we are aware of this. We are scheduling it for this time. We are working on this right now. And this is who's going to be accountable for getting it done. But we don't do that.
So then, if I were to take what you've just said, to just round that out, there's a piece about if you want to be in this business, there are certain fundamental things that as Canadians we would not accept. Mm-hmm. Let's add in, we don't accept a business that will not include all Canadians with the opportunity to be a customer, an employee, a supplier, a part of its economic success.
Exactly.
Is that a good way to say it?
Well, we would never hang out a sign on a business at a restaurant, anywhere, that says, women are not allowed here. But we do that every day with people with disabilities because we don't address the 2 stairs to get again, or the lack of Braille menus, or the inability for someone who is deaf to understand what's going on around them. We actively exclude people with disabilities every day. And that's the shift we have to make.
So Prasanna, again, thank you so much for the energy and the passion that you brought to your opening comments. You talked about the importance of stories and the stories that we tell ourselves. If you could cause us as Canadians to stop telling one story where we deceive ourselves about where we're at on the issue of truly including all, and what's the one story you'd like us to tell each other instead, what would that story be?
I think the story that I want all of us to stop saying is we are doing the best we can. And I think the story I want us to all say is that while I may not understand your experience, I am open to learning about it. So the story I want us to talk about is the power of bearing witness. Say one of the most powerful things we can do as human beings is to bear witness to the stories, perspectives, and lived experiences of other people, and allow what we learn to inform how we're going to move forward in the world. So now that you have shared your truth with me, your pain, the barriers that you face, the exclusion, the othering, I can no longer say that I'm unaware of it. I think the challenge comes, though, when we go back to the story we want to avoid, we're doing the best we can, is that we think the act of listening is the complete act of engagement. We've heard you, so we've done our job. We've listened to what you've had to say, we've read what you've written, we've attended the workshop that you've provided, therefore we've done all that we can do. The frustration exists when really those acts are the opening part of what bearing witness means. It is the act of putting yourself in the position of another person with an open heart and an open mind to learn about an experience that you have not had, that, like Lorin shared, you may one day experience. And then it's taking that information and thinking about what can I, in my own sphere of influence, whether I'm a CEO, whether I'm an intern starting at an organization, what can I do in my own sphere of influence with the information I now had to unlock those accessibility barriers? One of the challenges I find in working with clients is they often say, I don't have the ability or the power or the platform or the office to make difference. And I'll say, for example, if you work in an organization and your job is facilities management, you actually might have perspectives on how a building operates that someone in the C-suite will not have. So it's a twofold act. One is, how can you bring your expertise managing those facilities to those in leadership to share with them some of the barriers you're noticing on a day-to-day basis? And how can you as a leader ensure that you're working with all of the people across your organization? So the act of bearing witness, I says, we talk about accessibility in the corporate space as the act of playing with hot potato, like the game hot potato. Someone is responsible for a sliver of accessibility work. So facilities will be responsible for physical accessibility. The IT team might be responsible for information and communication accessibility issues. But people with disabilities are forced to go from office to office, email to email, asking for a sliver of dignity to piece together their full life. What would happen instead if in the act of bearing witness, corporations, organizations, offices took the act not just as an individual interaction, but said, in my sphere of influence, how can I ensure that I'm creating a cohesive approach so that when a person with a disability interacts with the organization, they are afforded the dignity and rights they are entitled to in law, and they are afforded with the respect that because of their very existence, they are entitled to.
So as I said at the outset, this is the first time I've had the opportunity for a live audience. And thank you also very much for your attention, your engagement, and being part of this conversation with 5 incredibly courageous Canadians who have done a wonderful job in helping to raise all of our understanding of the incredible importance of uniting all Canadians to live together in a country that has respect and dignity for everyone. And so my last question is actually to all of you to take away with you. And the question is this: what will you now do so that this night was a turning point in your life, in the lives of your family, your friends, and your community to make our country more accessible, as opposed to the missed opportunity of, well, that was a good talk, and go back to the way it was? A simple thing that I'm going to be far more conscious of than I ashamedly admit I have not been to date. Whenever I choose to do business, whether it's with a restaurant or a store or another organization, I'm going to actually go and ask, and how do you actively include everyone so that everyone can benefit from this business that you have together? That's my little way of trying to make a positive difference. Thank you all for coming out here tonight. Thanks for everybody online. This has been a terrific evening.
Thank you so much to Duncan and our panel. Now I'm going to invite everyone on stage to head out to the reception first so they have a chance to get a drink and catch their breath while I tell the rest of the audience a bit more about the Walrus. Read the Walrus. We have a special offer for those of you in the room, a full year's subscription to the Walrus. That's 8 issues delivered to your door for just $25. It's a great deal. You can visit the Walrus table in the lobby and we'll set you up. You can also read the Walrus online, paywall free. This is made possible thanks to people like you. The Walrus is a registered charity, and with your support, we can ensure that everyone has access to independent, fact-based journalism. Donate to the Walrus at thewalrus.ca/support, or come by our table in the lobby. All gifts, $20 or more, will receive a charitable tax receipt. Thanks again for joining us. And for those of you in person, we also encourage you to swing by our podcast booth in the back. We have it set up, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on what you've heard this evening. You can get a photo taken and tell us what you're going to do to continue this work. Also, for those of you who listen to podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the Courage Incorporated podcast, the one that Duncan hosts and mentioned while you're at our podcast booth. Thanks again to everyone at Deloitte for making these talks possible. A thank you to our national sponsors at the Walrus, Air Canada, the Belonging Forum, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, and RBC. Thank you for spending time with the Walrus in person and online, and for being a part of the Walrus community. Have a great evening, everyone.